Today I'm going to be comparing these two pedals. I've got the BassRig 64 by Origin Effects and the Capo by Jad Freer. And these two pedals don't necessarily set out to achieve the same thing. You know, this is, the BassRig is very specifically a kind of emulation, just using analog circuitry and stuff, of a Fender Bassman, trying to emulate the vibe and the character of what a Bassman does. And the Capo is more of just an amp simulator, and you can switch between a few different settings and get a ton of tones out of it. It's really versatile and sounds great. They both sound great. They're both Mojo pedals, really. And the funny thing is, they're both capable of getting super grungy, distorted, fuzzy sounds, which we'll take a little look at later. But the thing that I really wanted to get from each of them, we're in a day and age where people are working on in-ear monitors a lot, and you know, some of the gigs that I do in particular, there's no amps on stage, we're on in-ears. You're trying to bring back the vibe that you get from having a nice amp on stage that's kind of moving your trousers. And in the ears, things can get a bit sterile when it's just a direct bass sound. And also in the front of house, you know, you want to give them something a bit more than just a lead coming out of your bass guitar. And that kind of thickness and harmonic saturation and generating those harmonics further up can really fill out the whole mix and make the bass notes really clearer, but also just like fill some missing frequencies. And that's something that I've always been looking for, and I think these both do a great job of it. So just initially, as I compare these, I'm going to use some settings which are just kind of not super driven or anything, just like a very subtle saturation. And I'm going to set them both to a point where like just before the drive starts to break up. So you'll hear what I mean. First of all, let me tell you a bit about them. So we got the Origin BassRig, and there's no digital processing, as far as I know, going on in either of these pedals, which is great. I love that, because sometimes you find with the digital amp sims that there's just some dynamics that they didn't manage to capture, or some strange phase things, or some like particular notes don't come out right. And I like the idea that there's just a ton of capacitors and resistors in there that make it sound awesome. The BassRig, just to run you through it, it's kind of got two different amp like versions of the Bassman, the tweed and the blackface, and a few little toggle switches for like bringing out more fatness. Also a three-way EQ. The XLR out gives you a speaker simulation, and the Capo doesn't have that. It does have a selectable low-pass filter, which is super useful actually, because when you use a speaker emulation on this, you don't have the option of switching that off really. So that's only if you're using the XLR out. So for today's purposes, I'm just going to use the direct out. So it's just modelling the head part of a Bassman, and this is kind of doing a similar thing, just like modelling a head really. You got your three-way EQ, and then this stuff is all to do with the cab sim. So let's leave that for now. Moving on to the Capo, got quite a similar setup. We got, you know, you can adjust your drive and the output to compensate for it. But this control, I guess, is the equivalent of switching between the two types of amp on there. And you've got your J and F types of distortion, and they sound really different and really cool in their own way, and you'll hear in a moment what the characters of those are. Again, three-way EQ, but this time with parametric midband, which is great. They both have a blend control, which is also great, so you can just dial in a bit of your DI signal. And then the Capo also has an extra feature, which is like a secondary drive, and you can use that in two different ways. You know, some people would put a boost pedal in front of their valve amp to, you know, you can step on it and it drives the whole chain harder and gives you more drive. So you can make it behave like that, or you can also put it after the whole kind of amp sim thing, just for literally a level boost. And it has a kind of drive built in, which also sounds pretty great. So technically you've got two kinds of drive that you can have at the same time on this thing. Let's start on the BassRig, okay? So you can hear straight away it has that real valvey quality, and if you've ever played a Bassman, it's definitely reminiscent of that. I can hear a little bit of compression going on, and definitely the way I have it set up, even though there's no EQ engaged, has a bit of a bass hump, and really satisfying to play. It kind of makes me want to not stop. Just to compare again. For the moment I've got both of these pedals on max blend, so they're not including any direct signal, they're just 100% mix on these. So let me just show you this switch first, because I think this might be influencing things a little bit. I've got it on fat, which really gives it some low end oomph. If we just go over to the bright setting, and there's also a neutral position. And that's just so that's the tweed head model. Let's just switch over to the black face, which sounds like this. It's definitely like a lot kind of thinner and twangier, but you know, if you made up for it with a bit of gain and output, it's not lacking in low end. It's just I think it's more suited to playing with a plectrum, really, this head, or a guitar, really, you know. But yeah, whereas this one has quite a lot of mid-range information. This is actually way better with the pick, because just takes out all that kind of clacky sound and scoops out the stuff that maybe you don't want. So yeah, that's great for that. Let's move over to the Capo for a minute. DI signal. So as I was saying, I've got the drive set just below where it breaks up. So so that's my favourite setting of this control. So you can hear it's very similar actually to what these two sounds do. So over here we've got like the thin scooped sound, which again would be great for plectrum. So even without the EQ, it's kind of intrinsically very scooped sound and enhancing the tops and the bottoms. And then on the other side, we go to the F setting, and there's way less top end. Again, I'm hearing like a subtle compression effect and also a taming of the top end, but just like a thickness. It's very subtle, but it just stops it suddenly sounding like a DI bass, and I really like that. Anyway, you have a variable control here, which is amazing. So you can choose somewhere in between those two sounds. And as you'll hear, as you dial it back to that side, the top end starts to come in again. I think that's my favourite setting around there. Let's just, for a second, just play with the drive and see how that varies between the two. Okay, so that's the way that sounds when it's pretty driven. You can also kick in this extra preamp and put that in front, which will make it sound. So the cool thing about this is you can separate the two stages. So the BassRig doesn't really have this feature, but I'll just quickly show you this. Basically the green switch engages this whole set of knobs that you can see there. It's kind of the main essence of the pedal. But there's a secondary section which you can use in the way that guitarists often put a boost pedal before their amp, just to give it some clean gain going into the system. So you can treat it like that. So say we've got like a medium drive there on that. You could kick this in and just give it an extra, you know, drive going into the system. So technically your level won't be a lot different, but it'll be more driven. But the cool thing about this is you can hear it on its own as well, like totally disengage this whole section. See, that's super clean and it's just a little bit of a level at the moment, but there is a gain control on this. Let's drive this pretty hard. It's like a super soft fuzz with a really long front end on it, so it kind of goes whoop, do you know what I mean? And that can be fun to mix in with the other amp as well. And you can also put it after the other stage. Which makes a really big difference to the tone as well. Let's go back to the bass rig and give it some drive. It's got such a squelch to it. I mean, I guess I'm driving that pretty hard, but even on either of the amp settings and all the switches to do with the fatness and the brightness, you still get the squelch. There's kind of a wow, wow. Actually, really great effect in its own right. You could almost just keep that on your board just for that. But I think that it's really because I'm just driving it pretty hard. You have to remember with both of these pedals, you've got a blend control, you know, so even when you've got something that sounds like quite an extreme effect, if you just dial it in with and blend it nicely with the DI signal, you can just give it some kind of synthy sustain going on behind. Let's try and do a similar thing with the other pedal. Yeah, now you start to hear that they're really unique, you know, and the quality of them, as the more you drive them, is quite distinctive. But at those lower settings, I think they actually do quite a similar thing. And yeah, I haven't really looked at the EQ, to be honest, but they're both just 3-band EQs. I can show you quickly the kind of frequencies we're looking at. Start with the Capo. Really nice, nicely voiced low end on this. Quickly comparing to the bass of the BassRig, it doesn't affect the dry signal. So if you have the blend on 0, notice that noise goes away. I quite like a bit of hiss, to be honest, but definitely vintage vibes there. You go to dry mode, this EQ won't have any effect on this, whereas on the Capo I do believe, even when you blend the drive out, the EQ is still in circuit, so you can clearly hear that. So back to full blend on the BassRig, you hear a little bit of hiss come in. Nice vintage hiss. Actually don't mind a bit of that, but some sound engineers might. I don't know. You can always gate it or whatever. It actually becomes pretty much, as soon as you take the mix down to sort of 60% or something, which I normally would, you don't really hear it. So it doesn't bother me too much. But yeah, there's some noise, definitely a lot noisier than the Capo. But just checking out the EQ here, this is the way the bass sounds. It's definitely like a big, woofy, warm bass, like not a super slick, round, subby sound. The shelving seems to start a lot higher up and brings in those low mids, which is really great for vintage sounding stuff, but also for like just in a mix as well. That can be super useful if you're not playing in a system, if you're not playing in a venue with a really capable sound system. Sometimes you want some of this stuff in there, so I like it. The mid, it's very much Fender's idea of what a mid is, and it's actually, it's kind of in bass terms, it's pretty much treble, I think. Like 1K, 1.5K, maybe. Whereas the treble, again, get the plectrum out, great. It's actually, I find that treble really flattering. I would never normally add treble to my bass in that sort of frequency, but for some reason, sometimes when you have a nice EQ, it just makes it sound better. I really like it. Okay, going back to the Capo, just to check out the EQ. Very different character to that bass. Very hi-fi subs kind of character. Definitely thinking R&B sounds straight away rather than the Beatles, you know. We've got a parametric mid, so, and that actually goes from 100 Hertz all the way to 10K, so pretty much anything you could want there. 100 Hertz sounds great. 10K is probably a little bit high for bass. Well, let's look at the treble first, because yeah, that's quite a crispy high treble. Definitely very more modern bass amp voicings to these EQ settings. This is the kind of treble that's great for making your slap settings cut. And what I'd probably do in that scenario is find some stuff to cut out with this parametric mid. Yeah, something like that, take that. So that's a tone that you pretty much couldn't get out of this pedal. But also I find this treble a little bit high for my use. I probably would generally, if anything, I'd use that to back off and then find my own treble setting. Almost like more high mids that I'm interested in. Sounds great. So I guess to summarise, they can be very different sounding pedals, but at the lower settings of drive, they both do quite a similar thing to my ear, and you probably would to get your own sounds out of them, but I just kind of gravitated towards this very mild saturation and some slightly flattering EQ. I would say that the BassRig is very much geared towards more vintage sounds, and in that respect it can be a little bit restrictive. There's maybe more for certain situations, but also I find the EQ certainly more flattering and like more vibey. Maybe not so much as a kind of clinical EQ of turning up and down, you know, balancing the frequencies, but more like adding a vibe in a certain frequency range. And the Capo is like a very nice, clean, rich EQ, but not with the vintage character to it, just like very much what it says on the tin. Let's quickly just compare my two tones that I finally came up with. So on the Capo, it was kind of this. Here's the DI. And again. Okay, and over on the BassRig, this was kind of my final sound. Again, the DI. So you can see how they both achieve that thing that I was talking about at the beginning of a thickness and a vibiness. But yeah, they're definitely both capable of it, and they go about it in different ways. But those are my favourite settings. I should just quickly mention a few of the other features, like on the Capo. It's worth knowing that there's an effects loop built in, which is great. That's super handy. On this, when you use the cab sim on the output with the XLR, it actually narrows down the frequencies quite a lot anyway, and the low pass frequency comes up pretty high actually, but it's a very vintage approach, you know. So like on those old soul records, you would never really hear anything down around 60-70 hertz, and that would be true of this pedal if you take the XLR output, and they both have XLR outputs. Actually, this is Capo's very fully featured in terms of outputs. There's a clean XLR out, and there's also a processed XLR out. There's a parallel 1/4 inch out. There's an effects loop. So a lot of options available on that, whereas this is really just like, you can either choose to take this out to your amp. That's kind of the way it's designed. Take the 1/4 inch out to your amp, and then you could send the XLR to front of house, giving them the vintage, like shaved down frequency wise. version of your tone. There's some extra controls in this horn cut section which can temper your modern amp to sound more like the way this would want it to, you know. One final thing I should show you about the Capo is that it actually has a deep and a bite setting, which are like extra EQ controls, you know, obviously. So quickly. Well, let me put that bass flat again. Just compare that to the bass boost. Yeah, not massively different. I guess the deep switch has a bit more of a thickness to it. It's quite nice. Yeah, I also just love the frequency that they've chosen for the bass there. And then there's a bite, which really brings out all that fret rattle. So some extra options on the EQ, but really very flexible, you know. In a way, once you consider those, you've almost got like 5 EQ controls on top of your drive. Hope you enjoyed that little comparison video. Hopefully you get to try them out for yourself, and you'll probably find your own tones from these pedals and get them to do what you need them to do. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. If you're interested in getting some bass tips and techniques and videos about my gear and my approaches to music, you could always check out my Patreon page. Yeah, maybe see you on there, or see you at a gig somewhere, and hope you enjoyed it. Nice one, see you around.